Well, good morning, Blue Ridge, and welcome to week 4 of our Metamorphosis series. Before we begin to see what the Lord has to teach us today through the message, I encourage you to find a quiet place for worship, whether that's your living room, your bedroom, or your car. Now, let's join the worship team.
Can't go back to the beginning. Can't control what tomorrow will bring. But I know here in the middle is the place where you promise you'll be. Not enough unless you come. Will you meet me here again? 'Cause all I want is all you are. Will you meet me here again? As I walk now through the valley, let your love rise above every fear. Like the sun shaping the shadow, in my weakness your glory appears. I'm not enough unless you come. Will you meet me here again? 'Cause all I want is all you are. Will you meet me here again? Oh, I'm not enough unless you come. Will you meet me here again? 'Cause all I want is all you are. Will you meet me here again? I'm not enough unless you come. Will you meet me here again? 'Cause all I want is all you are. Will you meet me here again?
Well, thank you again for joining us this morning. My name is Natalie Bassey, and I have the pleasure of serving on the comms serving team. We are going to continue in our time of worship by giving. There are many ways to give, including online giving, text, and even writing in a check. You can find all of that information at blueridge.org/give. Also on our website, you can find some amazing ways you can step into community here at Blue Ridge, including serving or life groups. So feel free to check it out, find what is unique for you and where you can best serve with your gifts. Another great way to get involved with community is by attending one of our in-person services. Now, we do have 2 locations, which many of you know, one in Bedford and one at New London. Our New London location meets at 8:30 a.m. and 10:30 a.m. And what's super exciting is BR Kids is back at both locations. So if your child's in kindergarten through 5th grade, be sure to register them. So whether this is your first time joining us online or you've been joining us for the past few months, I encourage you to hit the subscribe button so you can stay up to date on all of our latest content. Now, let's join Jeremy to hear about part 4 of our Metamorphosis series.
Who do you want to be 10 years from now? This series is called Metamorphosis. It's about change. So let me ask you again, who do you want to be 10 years from now? Now, don't confuse the question I'm asking with where do you want to be in 10 years? Like, I want to be retired, or I want to be working my dream job, or I want to be a stay-at-home mom or dad. I asked, who do you want to be 10 years from now? Do you want to be someone that others like being around 10 years from now? Do you want to be someone people trust, someone that people look to for advice, someone who adds value to those around them? Who do you want to be 10 years from now? Now, you might say, Jeremy, I hope, or I think, or I believe that I'm that person right now. And that's great. I hope you are. But just because we may be that person right now does not necessarily mean we'll be that person 10 years from now. You see, here's the deal. Aging is inevitable, but growth is optional. Let me say that again. Aging is inevitable, but growth is optional. I remember a couple of guys that I used to go to high school with, and I'm sure if you're just a few years removed from high school, you had these type of guys too. These were the guys that when in high school, everyone liked them. Everybody wanted to be around them. They were the life of the party. They were the people that when we were freshmen, we looked up to them. But here's the deal. Graduation came and everybody moved on. Only they didn't. They still showed up to high school parties a little too long after their senior year. They got stuck back in the glory days. And when I've run into them in the years since high school, the conversation always revolves back to those great teams we were once a part of back then. What happened to them? Well, aging is inevitable. They got older, but growth is optional. See, even if we are right now that person that we want to be 10 years from now, it doesn't mean we're going to be that person then. So let me ask you again, who do you want to be 10 years from now? More specifically, as a follower of Jesus, who do you want to be in 10 years? Since that's really what we're talking about here. You know who I want to be? I want to be someone who's living a full spiritual life. I want to be a follower of Jesus that others want to come to it for advice. I want to be a follower of Jesus 10 years from now where people outside the faith who disagree with me still respect me. I want to be a follower of Jesus who's helping introduce others continually to him. I want to be someone who also is challenging followers of Jesus to be the person that God created him to be. I want to be using my gifts, the gifts that Woody referenced last week, to help affect people's lives to change. Who do you want to be 10 years from now? Well, here's the deal. Becoming that person, even if we feel like we're that person right now, requires a commitment to growth, to continual change. It requires us to regularly morph. Who do we want to be 10 years from today? Well, I believe as we continue reading today, Paul's words to the church at Ephesus, he's going to give us a very practical framework to become the people that we desire to be in the future. So if you have a Bible, would you open up to Ephesians chapter 4? And we're going to pick up reading where we left off last week. Ephesians chapter 4, and we start reading in verse 17. Paul says this, "Now this I say, and I testify in the Lord, that you must no longer walk as the Gentiles do." Now, two things real quickly to remember. The you here is the church, followers of Jesus's disciples, apprentices of Jesus. And the Gentiles here that Paul references means more than just a person or a group of people from non-Jewish descent. Paul is using the label Gentile here to refer to people who don't have a relationship with Jesus, people who are not Christ followers. So again, we continue in verse 17. It says, "Now this I say, and I testify in the Lord, you must no longer walk as the Gentiles do, in the futility of their minds. They are darkened in their understanding, alienated from the life of God because of the ignorance that is inside of them. Due to their hardness of hearts, they have become callous and have given themselves up to sensuality, greedy to practice every kind of impurity." Basically, Paul is saying a person who doesn't follow Jesus, a person who doesn't have God's Spirit living inside of them, that person is blind to the things of God, to living the values of God. He's basically saying their heart is hard to a life that would reflect who God is. They're ignorant, not negative. They just don't know. They can't recognize the things of God. This is why I get so frustrated when we as followers of Jesus try to get non-followers of Jesus to act like quote unquote Christians. That when church people try to get unchurched people to change the way that they live. Because here's the deal, guys. We're working on the outside before they've been transformed on the inside by Jesus. It's why Paul spent the first part of the 3 chapters of Ephesians pointing to our need collectively for Jesus and all that Jesus does inside a human being's heart once that person steps into an authentic relationship with him. You see, Paul is very clear here that when a person is alienated from God, they give themselves over to the things that aren't a part of his upside down kingdom. They're guided by their own desires, what they want, what they yearn for, what will make them happy, what will make them feel good rather than his Spirit and what pleases him. But look at what Paul says next when he talks to us as followers of Jesus. Look what he says, verse 20. But that is not the way you learned Christ. You see, once again, Paul is pointing out that it's only after a person steps into a relationship with Christ that true soul-level life change is possible. We will never experience the metamorphosis that we're talking about in this series without first starting with a relationship with Christ. It's why for some of us here, this whole religion thing isn't working. It's why you aren't experiencing the life change that you desire, because it starts with true surrender to Jesus. See, maybe we've been trying to be good first, and God is inviting us to be his first. Maybe we've been trying to prove that we could be loved by God when God has already proved his love for us through what Jesus did on the cross. Paul continues, he says this in verse 20, but that is not the way with you. Assuming that you have heard about him and were taught in him as the truth is in Jesus. See, Paul here is admittedly making an assumption, and I believe it's a pretty fair assumption, especially nowadays. Paul is saying, I assume the reason that we started following Jesus was because we learned about the life that he lived first. That we heard about the things like the fact that Jesus was born in the town of Bethlehem, that he grew up a carpenter's son, and that this carpenter's son one day became a rabbi, that is a teacher who taught about this upside down kingdom. Paul's saying, I assume you heard him teach about this upside down kingdom. Things like how the first shall be last and the last shall be first. I believe you know how he taught and how he lived a life that loved the unlovable and touched the untouchable. How he dined with sinners and tax collectors. How he said, rather than hate those who do harm to you, as followers of mine, I want you to love your enemy. Pray for those who persecute you. How he called his followers to care for the least of those that they encountered around them. See, Paul says here, I assume that you heard about the miraculous things he did, the healings and the forgiveness of sins that he offered. And Paul is saying, I assume that you were taught the life he lived and the death he died for all people to know his Father. And I assume that's why you've chosen to surrender your life to follow him. Now, I believe these assumptions by Paul, they're fair. That most of us here, even those of us that are the newest to the faith because of things that we possess, things like the accounts of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the gospel accounts of who this man Jesus was in the life that he lived, that most of us who call ourselves followers of Jesus have at least a rough idea of the life that he lived. And it's contrast to the life of someone who doesn't follow God the Father. That's fair, correct? Well, then Paul continues in verse 22. He says this, with that assumption, to put off your old self, which belongs to your former manner of life and is corrupt through deceitful desires, and to be renewed in the spirit of your minds, and to put on the new self created in the likeness of God in true righteousness and holiness. Paul invites us to put off this old self. See, Paul says, you know that change you want? You know that new thing you want to become? You know that renewal that you desire? You know that person you want to be 10 years from now? Well, guess what? It's possible now that we have a relationship with Christ. But it will require something from us. He stated this over and over again in chapter 4, like we've already seen through statements like live a life worthy of the calling, or make every effort, or by the grace given you. Then he asks us to respond a certain way. He says, I want you to look at the life that Jesus lived and then look at the life that you're living. Does it match? What doesn't? And what do I do? He asks us to put off that old self. Now, as I'm sure many of you have noticed through the years, that basically for the better part of the last 6 or 7 years, I've made the choice to only wear black t-shirts. Now, I did this for multiple reasons. 1, I was tired of trying to stay on trend. 2, I wanted to add some simplicity to my life. And 3, I just wanted to make one less decision in my life each day. So now I have a closet full of black t-shirts with one pair of like knockaround jeans that are made for doing messy work like chores around the house, and then one pair of jeans that I'm wearing right now that I wear in every other area of my life. So this makes certain things easy, like for example, packing for a trip. All you do is count how many days you're gonna be gone, reach into that closet and pull out that many black t-shirts, and then you're already almost done packing. But not everything is that simple when you're on a trip and all you have is black t-shirts. Like for example, how do you know which shirts you've already worn and which shirts are clean? Now, I know I could use a dirty bag and a clean bag, but that would just require too much organization for myself. So I do what I would have done in my early 20s. I perform the smell test. Does this smell like Tide, or does it smell like not Tide? Something else. Then I know which shirt to put back and which one to put on. See, what if we started performing the smell tests in our own lives? What in our life that we have on currently smells like that old life we used to live? What smells like the way someone would live who doesn't follow Jesus? And what smells like Christ, like the way that he lived his life? What would we need to put off and what would we need to put on? What would this look like? Well, as a teaching team, and I'm not just talking about the teaching team that teaches on Sunday morning. I'm talking about the group of people that gather each Tuesday to pray through and talk about what is taught on our online and our Sunday morning services. We thought it would be fun and helpful to make this very practical by sharing with you moments in our own lives over the last few months we've had to do exactly this. Take a listen.
So it was right at the beginning of the pandemic, and I had a deposit to make at Wells Fargo. So I am sitting in the drive-through line. I'm right at the teller's window where I can see her. She's like walking around doing her thing. I Google it, look at the clock. It's 9:05. It should be open. She's not opening. I'm getting irritated. She finally comes on and says, "I'm sorry, ma'am, we don't open because of the pandemic. We don't open until 9:30. And I can't just say like a normal human, like, okay, great, I'll come back around then. I have to tell her why she's so wrong because the hours on Google were wrong. I can't even remember the words. I just know it was rude. And I ended up, she's still talking to me, and I end up driving away as the woman is still talking to me.
For me, I do a lot better with conversations with people face to face. So if I'm in a meeting and we disagree, we can kind of talk things out. But seeing people really tends to help me see it from their perspective, or even just little comments that people make and rub me the wrong way. If I see them face to face, I can take that as probably how it's intended. However, with quarantine, I find myself kind of rehashing those conversations or little comments or people's perspectives in my head. And I, of course, always win the verbal battle in my head. However, I find that I can't fix that with the face-to-face conversations.
So I get on the highway, I'm heading to the next Wells Fargo because I'm not gonna wait there, and I'm definitely not gonna circle back around. And I feel this quiet, I would say probably voice, sense from God of, Melissa, you can be in the right and still not be right. You need to turn around. And I'm like, oh, please. It took everything in me to do the U-turn, to turn the car around, and to by then have to sit in line now to talk to this woman to apologize. And she was so wonderful. She came to the window. When I apologized, she said, I received that. I received that. And it felt like a moment. I could see her eyes, like we're at a distance. I can see her eyes of real connection when, as I then pulled out, humiliated, my face red, all of that, but so glad that God does this work that I would never be able to do on the inside of my own self.
And so I have to take this practice where I put off the normal way of thinking, and I set aside me winning the battles, and I put on this idea of thinking the best of them, the practice of really trying to see it from their perspective. That way I'm not caught in these mental cycles that I find happen a lot more when we're in quarantine.
It was the end of the summer, and all summer my family was really excited about taking Janet and Jeremy's little 10-year-old girl to the pool with us. The problem was COVID was really limiting when guest passes would work at the pool and when they wouldn't. So one day Ella's at our house playing, and we wanted to go to the pool, which I knew it was a no guest pass zone. I'm like, you guys don't worry about it, because my plan was, as soon as we got to the pool, to stop where the manager sits every time and ask permission, because I'd seen him give it to many other people. So we get to the pool, we walk in, nobody's sitting there. And we all look at each other and we're like, quick, 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 go, go, go. Because we knew we were breaking the rules. Now it's the next day. Jana calls me and she's like, hey, I have a question for you. Ella and I were talking about how much fun she had at the pool on the way home yesterday. And she said, Mom, why did Miss Andy take me to the pool knowing that there's no guest passes? Isn't that lying? Immediately I'm out of the chair and I'm pacing in my living room and kitchen, literally. And I said, no, Janet, that's not what happened. I said, while the girls were playing, I snuck over to the manager and made sure that we had permission, and he said not to worry about it. I completely lied through my teeth. And she's like, oh, that makes so much more sense, because you know what? Like, we're really just praying for Ella's heart that she would learn to love the truth and honor God and realize He is a God of truth. I knew I had to be honest about it.
As my wife says, Woody, you're not really good at taking directions and playing by the rules. And I'm not. I have a tendency to go the other way. As my daddy said when I was growing up, he said, Woody, if you were to drown, I'd look upstream for you. So when they said wear a mask, my natural tendency was, why? Well, that doesn't apply to me. However, a question I ask, and we ask around here, is what does God have to say about it? And really, I couldn't find a lot that would support my position of not wearing a mask. But when I read, Scripture, I didn't have any problem finding places where it said, it said the opposite. For example, Paul says in Philippians chapter 2, do nothing from selfishness or empty conceit, but with humility of mind, regard one another as more important than yourselves. Don't merely look out for your own personal interest, but also for the interest of others. Have this attitude in yourselves, which was also in Christ Jesus. So, I realize that there are a lot of people who are very sensitive and a lot of people who are at risk. People like, as I said, in my age category. And for me, not to wear one is really to set my interest or my desires or my rights above theirs.
So I stopped her. I totally interrupted her. I'm like, Jana, wait. I'm literally lying to you right now about not lying to you. And I told her everything. And I said, please forgive me. And she's like, of course. And then she said, would you be willing to talk to Ella about this? I had already felt like this big, and now I've got to confess my sins to a 10-year-old little kid. And I was like, absolutely. So between God and I in my kitchen, I was like, God, I don't know what I just did. I am so sorry. So then I pick up the phone and FaceTime Ella, and I tell her everything. I lied about this and this and this and this. But it didn't stop there, because then I knew, like, To really put on the new self meant I had to drive to the stupid swimming pool and look for manager Mike and introduce myself to him and go through all of this, explain my dishonesty and my relationship with God, leading me to ask his forgiveness.
So, what did I have to put off? I had to put off my independence and my opinions and my rights. And what did I have to put on? And what did I put on gladly? Let me ask.
Aging is inevitable, but growth is optional. What do we need to put off so that we can put on the way that Jesus modeled for us to live? A couple of weeks ago at our new London service, I was speaking. One of the elements that we've participated in each week that's been a part of our live services since returning has been communion. We think it's really important in this season for us as followers of Jesus to be reminded of the powerful work that Jesus did on the cross. But so as to not make it religious or routine each week, what we've been doing is having different people lead it at different places in our service. Well, this specific week, it was after the first couple of songs, and it was led by one of our song leaders that day. So as I stood backstage by myself, I was still wanting to engage with communion before I came out to speak. So Nate Brown, who was leading at the time, asked us to do what we often ask you to do each week before taking communion. That's examine ourselves. What do you need to make right in yourself before taking communion? In essence, what do we need to put off? And immediately as I sat backstage, what came to my mind was how I had treated my wife and my kids the day before. I had yelled, I'd lost my temper, I'd just been really a plain jerk. And so I did what often we invite you guys to do. As a practical way of putting off that old self, I texted each one of them individually. And I admitted how I had acted wrong, and I asked for their forgiveness. You see, aging is inevitable, but growth, it's optional. Who do you want to be 10 years from now? Being that person 10 years from now will require a commitment to putting off the old self. The things that we wear from our old life that doesn't smell like the life that we know that Jesus lived. Next week, Woody's going to talk more about what it looks like to put new things on. But this week, I just want to give us a moment. I'm not going to give us a big list of things we might need to take off. I'm just going to ask you, what do you need to put off? What in your life doesn't look like the life that Jesus lived? Would you take a moment and ask Jesus yourself, what do I need to take off? Jesus, as we sit in our living rooms, as we sit maybe with some friends, as we sit listening to this in our cars or at a coffee shop, I pray that the things in that moment where we just had a moment to reflect on what we need to put off, would you begin this week reminding us continually when that comes back up, when we try to put on those old smelly shirts once again, would you remind us and would you give us practical things that we can do to put it off, to respond, to continue to do what you're inviting us to do, to make every effort to live a life worthy of the calling, that because of the grace that you offered us to no longer live as we once did, and take those old grave clothes off for good. It's in your name we pray, Jesus. Amen.
You are here, moving in our midst. I worship you.
And once again, thank you so much for joining us this Sunday morning. Feel free to connect with us on our Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter, and we look forward to seeing you again next Sunday.